Hi everyone. So the problem that we are going to be trying to solve today, it has two parts. So we need to find the value for cosine of 2u, and we also got to find the value of cosine of u over 2. And what we're given to solve these two parts is the value of sine of u is equal to negative 5 over 13. And we're also given that the angle u is within pi and 3 pi over 2. So within the angle within pi and 3 pi over 2 would be in quadrant 3. And some other information that we're going to need to solve these two parts. So since we're finding cosine of 2u and cosine of u over 2, that's going to be a trig identity problem. So which is why I have these two formulas written down. One for cosine of 2u is equal to cosine squared of theta minus sine squared of theta. And to find cosine of u over 2 would be square root of 1 plus cosine theta over 2. Okay, so to begin the problem, we know that the angle u is going to be in quadrant 3, which is what I sketched out. And we also have the information given that sine is equal to negative 5 over 13. So given that information, we have this triangle being formed, and since angle u, I wrote theta here, but it's angle u, starting from this point, we know that sine is equal to this. So we could say that the opposite side from where theta is would be 5, and then the hypotenuse would be 13, since sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So I'm going to go ahead and label those parts of the triangle. So I went ahead and labeled the values for the sides. But one important thing to note is that since this part of the triangle is decreasing, it's going down right here, down in the negative y direction, that value is going to be negative 5. And then from here, we are just going to be doing Pythagorean theorem in order to figure out what the x value would be right here. Okay, so now we are going to solve for the remaining adjacent side in order to complete the rest of the problem. So I will be using the Pythagorean theorem to find the adjacent side. So we're going to do negative 5 squared plus b squared is equal to 13 squared. So negative 5 squared is just 25, and then plus b squared is equal to 13 squared is 169. So that's what I have so far. And then what you want to do is get b squared alone, because that's the adjacent side we were trying to solve for. So you subtract 25 on both sides, subtract 25, and then you get b squared is equal to 144. So you get that. And then you take the square root on both sides to get rid of the squared on b. So you get b is equal to plus or minus 12, since square root 144 is 12. So we have b is equal to plus or minus 12. And right here, since x would be in this quadrant is negative, the value of 12 would be negative. So you have plus or minus, so you're going to choose the minus value since we are in the negative quadrant. So now we've completed this, and we could find our cosine values to continue with the problem. So remember, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So since cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, we are able to fill in the remaining sides of the triangle. So now we have our triangle completely done. And we can move on to the next part of the problem. Since we now have what our value of cosine is, we will find out what cosine of 2u is. Okay, so we are going to begin solving for cosine of 2u. So in order to solve for cosine of 2u, we need to use this formula, cosine squared of theta minus sine squared of theta. So we have what the value of cosine is, cosine of u. So we have negative 12 over 13 is what we solved for. So that's the value of cosine, but the formula tells us to square it. So we're just going to put that value in parentheses and then add an exponent of 2. And then minus sine squared of theta. So sine, the value of sine was negative 5 over 13. And you're going to square that as well. So this is what you have to begin solving the problem. So I'm going to go ahead, square negative 12 becomes 144. 13 squared is 169. 169, and then minus negative 5 squared is positive 25, and then over 13 squared is 169. So now we have this is our remainder. So then 144 minus 25, since they're both over 169, we get 119 over 169 is what cosine of 2u is. So that's cosine of 2u. That's what the value you get. And let me write a decimal approximation for that. So 119 divided by 169 equals 0.704414. But since 4 isn't enough to round the 1 to 2, we're just going to leave it at 0.7041. Okay, now that we have solved part A, we need to do part B. So cosine of u over 2. Before we even try to attempt to solve this problem, one important thing that you need to take note of is where the angle is located in. So we're told that the angle is between pi and 3 pi over 2. So just to make things easier, I'm just going to change it to pi is equal to 180 degrees. And 3 pi over 2 is 270 degrees. So we could rewrite it as that, is where our angle is. And now since we're using the half angle formula to find cosine of theta over 2, we also need to have these values right here. So 180 over 2 and 270 over 2. In order to figure out where we are going to, what quadrant we are going to be in now. So 180 over 2 just becomes 90 degrees. And 270 just becomes 135 degrees. Okay, so now we have these new values of where our angle is. So that actually lands into quadrant 2. So 90 degrees would be right here, pi over 2. And then 135 degrees would be about right here, but not past, not onto the third quadrant. So it would be in the second quadrant right around here. So now that we know what values to use for cosine. So in the formula, it shows plus or minus the square root. So since cosine is negative in quadrant 2, we're going to use the negative value for what we get once we're done calculating everything. So let's write down cosine again. Cosine of u was negative 12 over 13. And we are just going to plug it into the formula that we have. So square root of 1 plus negative 12 over 13 over 2. So this is what it looks like. So to simplify the numerator, we could do, we could add the 1 to the negative 12/13. So 1 would be 13 over 13, because that would be what 1 would equal to in this situation, since it's out of 13. So we could rewrite 1 as 13 over 13 and then add it to negative 12 over 13. And then all of that over 2. So this is what it looks like in its rewritten form. So then you just do 13 minus 12, which would just be 1. So you get 1 over 13 over 2. And all of that's going to be under the radical, the square root radical, right over there. Rewritten. Actually ran out of space. So let me rewrite it over here. So we got 1 over 13 over 2, all under a radical. And so 1 over 13 over 2, that's a complex fraction. So we got 1 over 13 divided by 2. And you could write 2 as 2 over 1. So rewrite it there. And then in order to divide it, you do 1 over 13. You do keep, change, flip. So you keep the 1/13. You change the division to multiplication. And then you flip it to 1/2. So you get 1/13 times 1/2, which would equal 1/26. So you get 1/26. And then we need to put that back into the radical. So 1/26. Square root of 1 over 26. So now we need to distribute the radical. So square root of 1 over square root of 26. Which equals square root of 1 is just 1. And then at the bottom you get square root of 26. And then in order to rationalize the denominator, you would just multiply square root of 26. And then what you would get is square root of 26 over 26. So what cosine of theta over 2 would be. But in this case, theta is u. But we also need to add the negative, since cosine is in the second quadrant. So it'll be negative square root of 26 over 26. So that is your final value for part B.